We talked to Jeremy Crawford about all things D&D. A few weeks ago, we had the chance to talk with D&D Lead Designer Jeremy Crawford about the 2025 Monster Manual and the future of Dungeons & Dragons. While we didn't have the chance to do a video recording of it, we did have our phone on us and we recorded the whole thing. So please enjoy as we talk about the future of the game and what makes this Monster Manual so different. And don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons while you're at it. Now, let's get into the interview.
My first question is one of the things I just wrote about that went up this morning was the aboleth. You changed it from a fish to this like weird otherworldly thing. Now the mechanics obviously are still mostly the same, but it's no longer our little like fishy boy. It's a monstrous eldritch entity. Why?
So a number of the changes we've made in the book were motivated by a desire to have the monster's design reflect its story better. Mm-hmm. And so, we've talked a lot about, we tuned up the mechanics, we made it more fun, we added in, new twists. But another big part of what we were trying to do is, as we went to each stat block, determine, is this stat block actually, and the art together, are they actually delivering the story we tell about this creature? And so with the aboleth in particular, their story for a long time has been they're enemies of gods. They've, had these ancient empires. And then we would looked at how we depicted them in the past and like, well, I'm not getting that from either the art or the stat block.
It always came off as delusional.
And we really wanted to make it clear they are terrifying. Mm-hmm. And we especially had fun in the image that's in the book of not just showing this big eldritch horror, but even having a cultist bowing down before it to show that, yes, these are creatures who view themselves as superior to the gods.
One of the things I've been asking over the course of these interviews with the Player's Handbook, with the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual, is, this resets the table, so to speak, for Dungeons & Dragons. So what are things that people should look in the Monster Manual, not only with the mechanics and how that's going to impact gameplay moving forward, but with what creatures are appearing, how those creatures look, what creatures got, the dragons all got big redesigns, and lo and behold, we're getting a dragon anthology. What things can we look at in the Monster Manual and say, this is going to be a big deal for later?
I think, first off, the NPCs are going to get a ton of use, and so I just would say to everyone, get ready for a lot of pirates and performers, but then also some classic monster groups have gotten some really important changes. So just one example, goblins. Mm-hmm. Goblins show up at some point in most campaigns, and the goblin family that's in the book, not only are they now designated as Fae, which, one, we did that for story reasons, but that's also going to have some mechanical outcomes, which are purposeful. It is purposeful that now, Charm Person isn't going to work on them. Hold Person is not going to work on them. That is an intentional design choice because it was important for us to better differentiate some of what in the past have been referred to as monstrous humanoids. We wanted to better differentiate them from each other. We didn't want to fall into the trap of basically, they're all humans, but with just different foreheads. Yeah. We really wanted to make sure they're truly different types of creatures. And goblins, for centuries in the real world, have been associated with Fae folk. This is a shift we started in Monsters of the Multiverse. And so there's that, but then we also have some new goblins. We have the Goblin Hexer, which is a callback to a goblin we actually had in 4th edition, because we wanted to have a tricksy spellcasting goblin in the mix. But then we also have created a new goblin minion, because we wanted essentially there to be a goblin that could appear in even larger numbers than the baseline goblin we had before, because we know DMs often like to have hordes of them. And so I think just that combo means you're going to start seeing more spellcasting goblins, you're going to see larger hordes of them, and some of your spells are not going to work on them the way they did before. And another thing I think that's going to be a biggie is just how often people are going to be surprised by creatures they've fought many times before. Surprise will come up less often for those monsters that tend to be pretty rare. So it's still, you maybe have only encountered it once before, or this will be your first time. So there'll be less surprise there because probably the player won't even be able to remember the details from before, or again, they're facing it for the first time. But with goblins, many people have experienced them before, and so they're going to start feeling like, oh, they've evolved. Another place where you're going to see that is in vampires. And I bring up vampires not only because they're popular, but they come up a lot. And I loved when I was at Luca Comics and Games, at the games I was running, the D&D games I was running there for attendees, I was always using monsters from the new monster manual, including new vampires. And I loved seeing the shock on people's faces when the vampires started doing things that they don't do in the 2014 monster manual. Like simple things like vampires can now just disengage as a bonus action. Because we realized when analyzing vampires, it was too easy to lock some of them down, and part of the vampire shtick and folklore is they are extremely difficult to pin down. And so you're going to see that in addition to being able to encounter brand new types of vampires, because we not only have a bigger CR spread, but we're also going to throw people, because now when you face a vampire, you don't know, like, is this a standard vampire? Is this an umbral lord who's going to be flying around and destroying us with necrotic magic? Is this a Nightbringer? That is almost more like a shriveled up Nosferatu that has different abilities from the regular vampire. So there's going to be, I think, opportunities for DMs to pleasantly shock even the most jaded players because of a lot of these new things.
Well, when I was reading through the monster manual, I noticed there seemed to be a lot of I don't want to say callbacks to 4E, but it seemed to draw some inspiration. We saw the jobs that like goblins have now, and Bloodied obviously has come back. And I was kind of curious because like 4th edition is kind of like the redhead stepchild of D&D, and in recent years, like it's kind of started to get its flowers, and I was wondering if that was like a deliberate choice, like that you pulled. Like, the various occupations and Bloodied and things like that. If you look to 4th edition for, like, inspiration, especially in the, because we removed the adventuring day from 5e. 4th edition combat was very much like, in this combat session, you are going to be tested every single time. And 5th edition is like, over the course of a day, you will have to resource management. Those are two totally different styles of games. And it seems like we're going back more towards the 4th edition style of these combats are going to hit you harder. So I'm just curious how much of a role 4th edition played in all of that.
So just as when we first created 5e, we looked at all previous editions for, for gems that we could bring forward, we did that again. And so we were looking at 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and indeed 4th. So yeah, there are gems from 4th edition that we have happily brought forward. And several of us on the team worked on 4th edition. I, particularly in the later years of 4th edition, I did a lot of work on monsters. And absolutely, there are things that I did in 4E monsters and that other members of the team did that we happily brought forward if we knew it worked well and we took the time to make sure it integrated into a 5th edition environment in a natural way. We're always looking for opportunities to take the best parts of previous editions and bring them forward when the time is right, when the community seems ready for it, when it's the right tool for the job. Because anytime we're faced with a new design problem, we have the option of, do we do something new? Or do we repurpose something that we've done in the past in D&D? And so you can see that actually all over the place in this book. It's a mix of things you've never seen before that particular monsters are doing, but then in other cases, places where we remembered some nugget we loved from, a past monster book, and sometimes a past monster book that a member of our team actually worked on. Like, what if we brought that back? And like I always had a special fondness for the Goblin Hexer in 4th edition, and that's why I put the Goblin Hexer on the list of monsters that would go into this book.
Kind of along those lines, because we see there's 3 different types of Githzerai, 3 different types of Githyanki. There's 3 or 4 types of goblins in there. Are we going to see more of that in future books and stuff like that? Is that going to kind of be the more norm? Because one of the things that got brought up, and let me take a step back. One of the things that got brought up with the NPCs, that could be a humanoid, and so people were like, well, orc humanoids, like if I have an orc brawler, that should probably be stronger than, say, a human brawler, which doesn't really fit within like the 5e ethos, but it is what it is. Are we going to start seeing more specializations and creature, here's the general creature stat block, but here's a couple of extra things that this monster can do to make it hit harder or be trixier or something along those lines?
We are signaling throughout this book, and this is a direction that we were taking in Monsters of the Multiverse, and then also in some of the intervening books, where we more and more want to really drive home that each stat block is representing only a slice of a particular type of creature.
Yeah.
And when we provide a stat block, it's like, well, this is one way this creature could work. And we always love it when we do variants to drive home just how much design space and storytelling space there is within each of these monsters' broad concepts. And that's why, like with Githyanki, we wanted to add the Githyanki Dracomancer, not only to have a higher CR Githyanki to face, but also we realized in none of our Githyanki variants did we have one that was really leaning into that important part of their story, of their bond with red dragons. Yeah. And that's, again, another example of how story was often motivating what we were doing with some of these new monsters, of how can we bring some of D&D's lore to the fore better with some of our monster design choices. And you'll definitely see more variants in future books, because we think that's it's an interesting design space. It means we can tailor make things for particular settings, particular adventures, and it's a good way for us to model for DMs what they can do in their own campaigns. Of take maybe the baseline version of something and then add in a few interesting tweaks, and suddenly you have a whole new monster.
Totally changing topics. The various fiends, the demons, the devils, and the Yugoloths, they also got updated looks. They look a lot more like monstrous and just something that has been pulled out of an infernal plane. I did note that, and again, I think part of this is because Bordenkainen's Tome of Foes really expanded the demon lore. So maybe it's just in the monster manual. But I noticed there's only a handful of each of those different types of like the devils, the fiends. I was curious about, why you chose which ones, because I don't think there was that many Yugoloths in the 2014 monster manual. Why they were included in the 2024 monster manual, and, why, again, the decision to make them look very different than what they came before.
So the Fiends map to what was in the 2014.
Okay.
So even the Yugoloths, and this is actually a funny result of us using alphabetization for everything.
Mm-hmm.
The Yugoloths previously were all crammed together in the 2014 book, and they didn't each have their own key piece of art.
Okay.
So, and I actually love that you got the impression there were more of them, because that actually gets at why we changed the organization and gave everyone a key piece of art, because we realized some of these monsters were kind of hiding in plain sight in the 2014 monster manual. Because if you have a page with a bunch of stat blocks on it, and then especially if you have one or two stat blocks that doesn't have a key piece of art, it's really easy for that stat block to never see use. So we wanted to, basically, if a monster is going to make it into the monster manual, it's going to get a piece of art that's there to inspire you, draw you in, make you ponder as a DM. Maybe I want to include this. And we also really wanted to make sure each stat block sang. When it came to revamping the look of the Fiends, we really wanted to drive home that just looking at them, you would be able to tell there is something malevolent here, that this isn't just a creature that like rose up out of a swamp, that like if it rose up out of a swamp, it rose out of a swamp of pure evil. And that's a mindset of really having the art communicate the nature of some of these otherworldly creatures. That was behind some of the visual revamps that we did for many of the creatures in this book. You'll notice that also celestials look more otherworldly than they used to, because when we were evaluating some of our visuals, we frankly felt some of our celestials looked too much just like, well, that's just a dude who put wings on. Yeah. And we wanted to make sure that if you saw an angel, you could tell immediately, whoa, that is not from here. If you're assuming you're on the material plane. And so throughout, you will see that a lot of the creatures that are part of their visual enhancement was bringing their nature to the fore more, making it so that you could tell there's really something special or terrifying or wondrous here. And that means some of the creatures are way scarier than they used to be. Also, some creatures are more whimsical than they used to be. And all of that is tailored to what's appropriate for the creature's story and for the mood that we want to put in front of the DM as kind of an enticement for the DM to ponder whether they want to include that monster in their game.
So a very random side question here, since you brought up Celestials. As a good Catholic boy, will we ever get biblically accurate angels?
So we talked about that. We ran out of room. So we have the the classics, the Solar, the Deva, and the Planetar. We considered making a room for a even higher CR angel than the Solar, and making it the actual terrifying look that is described in the Bible. Because a lot of people don't realize, like, angels in the Bible, if they are, especially the ones in heaven described, like, these clusters of wings covered with eyeballs.
Yeah.
Like, this is not the pretty person showing up with dove wings.
Those are the low-level angels.
Yes.
Or if they look humanoid, they're low-level. With the more eyes they have, the higher up they are.
But it is with that in mind is one of the reasons that our concept for the angels is very much that they appear the way they do to avoid breaking the minds of mortals. And so you can actually think of the images that are in the monster manual for the angels. Those are not actually their true appearances.
Okay.
That is their just that's sort of the form they put on because they, to whatever mortal they were appearing to at that moment, that is the form that would make it possible for the mortal to be able to handle even communicating with the angel.
Okay. My last question, I'm going to jump ahead to Eberron. And this is just, can you give me a tease about what Eberron airship mechanics look like? Anything you can tease whatsoever.
So we did some vehicle work in Descent into Avernus with the Infernal War Machines that we are bringing to Eberron to provide an easier way for DMs to get airships into the mix. So that's all I'll say for now. But we're building on some of the work that we did with Infernal War Machines way back in Descent into Avernus.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, my pleasure.